You're listening to Mr. Credit on San Diego 1700 with local credit expert Derek Evans. Now, live in studio, Mr. Credit.
Welcome to Mr. Credit. We are live and local here in San Diego, bringing you the most important hour in radio, telling you everything that they don't want you to know. Today we're going to be talking about inquiries. I'm going to get into that into detail. A lot of misconceptions about getting inquiries on your credit. I'll dispel all the myths a little later in the show. Be answering your emails. We're also going to be talking about buying a home today. Get a lot of questions about it. I don't cover it much on the show. That will all change today. Of course, you can listen to all the Padres games right here on San Diego 1700. Tonight, we are in Houston at 5 p.m., so make sure you save this station in your dial. First, we've got to get to a news story here. This one comes from the Chicago Tribune, and the title is TransUnion Battling Attempts to Ban Employment Credit Checks. Now, we've talked a lot about how employers can pull your credit. Not just when you're applying for a job, but when you're already employed. They can check on your credit, do background checks pretty much any time they want. Now, they have to get your permission, but they usually do that when you sign your initial employment application. So don't think they can't do it without notifying you now. Here's how the story reads. TransUnion, the Chicago-based credit reporting agency controlled by the powerful Pritzker family, is fighting to preserve the use of credit checks in employment screening, even as several states, including Illinois, threaten to outlaw the practice in most circumstances as discriminatory. Now, the first issue I have here is that it's not discriminatory to pull credit as long as you do it to every single job applicant. If you were just pulling the credit of minorities or just pulling the credit of people who are a certain age or who are male or female, then that is discriminatory, of course. But as an employer, I personally think that it's a good idea to pull someone's credit, because they should be aware of it. And I think if someone is paying attention to their credit and they know what's going on with it and they're being responsible with it, then that will show. And that's one of the reasons why I think everyone needs to know what their credit looks like, because they will do this. Now, the government's trying to keep people from doing this because they're saying it's keeping jobs from happening, it's keeping people from getting jobs. And I certainly sympathize with that, especially when there's errors on credit reports so prevalently as there is. But it's your responsibility, and that's the point of the show. I'm here to tell you that. It's your responsibility to make sure that your credit report is as accurate as possible, because no one else is looking out for you. The bureaus don't care. The banks don't care. The creditors couldn't care less. Just keep that in mind. It's really important. So it goes on to say they make their money from employers and financial institutions that use such information in helping guide their decisions about lending, extending credit, housing, so forth. Listen to this. TransUnion's chairman, Penny Pritzker, serves on the President's Economic Recovery Advisory Board, charged with advising Barack Obama's economic recovery efforts. Some say her company's lobbying efforts, which have extended to Oregon and Connecticut, undermine the nation's goals of getting back to work more than 15 million unemployed people in the U.S. This is the most pertinent point that exists. Someone who's on the President's Advisory Board is the chairman of a company that outsources a significant amount of their employment. We talk about this all the time, but I can't emphasize it enough. These bureaus are outsourcing all these jobs. Tens of thousands of jobs they're outsourcing to save money. We don't know what TransUnion's numbers are because they're a private company, but the publicly traded company Equifax made $461 million the first 3 months this year. You have to assume that TransUnion is in that ballpark. They could have the jobs in the U.S. easily, and still make a killing. But because of the significant amount of greed involved, they're sending the stuff overseas to get it cheaper. They don't care about servicing you properly. In fact, they're breaking the law in most instances. Why in the world is this person on the President's Advisory Board for Economic Recovery? I mean, does anyone else see what I'm seeing here? The person who's responsible for outsourcing jobs out of the United States, tens of thousands of them, is on the President's Advisory Board for Economic Recovery. Don't get it. But this is what hundreds of millions of dollars in profit every quarter can buy you. The fact that you're the person to go to in these situations. Do I blame the president? No. I just don't like it. I just don't think that it's fair. I don't like it one bit. So it goes on to say that TransUnion has publicly defended credit checks as a way for employers to protect themselves against theft and fraud. And this is where I agree. As an employer, myself, and as having been general managers for different companies, I think it's important to be able to see if someone has judgments on their credit report, if they owe a significant amount of money to someone, if their wages are potentially being garnished. I think that's important to know, especially if you are the holder of very sensitive information. If you hold people's credit card information, if you hold people's payment information, bank accounts, maybe even credit information, I think it's important for you to be able to screen potential employees to make sure that they aren't more prone to do something rash in order to capture money for themselves and their family. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, we've said before that the government has connection to the bureaus indirectly through the banks, right? Because we, the government, own the majority of the main banks right now. And the banks are the one who drive the bureaus because they're the one who need the bureaus. Now, this is the same government that brought you this.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
So a tiny bit scary when we're saying now that there's not only an indirect connection between the government and the bureaus, but we actually have a chairman of TransUnion on the President's Economic Recovery Advisory Board. Seems a little bit sketchy to me. How can you protect yourself? What does this mean to you? The bottom line is this. We've got a very legislative administration right now. They like to do a lot of legislating. So it's likely that they're going to try to thwart this thing. Now, does that mean that employers can't still do background checks and things like that? Of course not. Does that mean that they can't outsource it to companies like LiveScan or something like that, where they're kind of indirectly pulling your criminal history and so forth? No. And in fact, I guarantee they're going to continue to do that. It's a simple supply and demand situation. There just isn't a supply of a lot of jobs. There's a significant demand for them. And so these employers have to go through this huge sift to try to figure out who they want to hire, and they're going to continue to sift. The best thing you can do in this situation is become educated about your credit, and when you submit your resume to these companies, submit a copy of your credit report. Let me tell you something. If you submit a resume or if you submit your credit report with your resume when you're applying for a job and you have good-looking credit, I promise you're going to go in the we're going to interview him pile. I guarantee it, because nobody else is going that far. Nobody else is submitting a credit report. You could be the one who's doing it. You're the only one, and you got good credit. That's great. Now you're saying, well, what if my credit's not so good? Well, in that case, it's even more important to submit a copy of the report and say, look, my credit score is 612. I'm aware that it needs to be higher than 720. These are the steps I'm taking. I listen to Mr. Credit every day. That'll help you. So if you can give them that idea that you're responsible enough to know what's on your credit report, to know where your credit score is, to know where you want it to go, that shows the responsibility that they're trying to predict by pulling the credit in the first place. So it won't matter as much what your actual credit score is, because you will be showing them what they want to see. Responsibility. That's what it's all about. Responsibility. And if they see that you're a responsible person, then they're going to get what they wanted out of the credit check anyway. Now, you should especially have a copy of your credit report on hand if you are looking for jobs, just in case something weird happens on your report, a collection shows up or a late payment gets reported erroneously, because then you can send them the report that you had that might be a month or two old. It might not show that, so you have the opportunity to fix that. If you just let them pull it, they're going to pull a recent one, and who knows, something may have come up between the time you pulled it and then. And you might actually get persecuted even more than just having your score be lower than it should be. And that's the last thing that you want. So there was another one here. This one was from the foxbusiness.com, and this one was saying that states stepping up to limit pre-employment credit checks. And one of the things that they put in here that I thought was really interesting was that the Connecticut State Representative Matthew Lesser said this is an obnoxious practice that has been excluding a number of perfectly acceptable, perfectly qualified job applicants.